The escape pod screamed through the atmosphere of Arctis 7, and Samantha Perry gripped the emergency handles so hard her knuckles turned white. She had been on a simple medical transport mission, nothing more than delivering supplies to a forward base during the ceasefire negotiations between humanity and the Cathari Empire. But the ceasefire had meant nothing to the fighter that came out of nowhere and tore her ship apart in seconds. Sam slammed her palm against the emergency beacon as the pod shook violently around her. And through the small viewport, she could see another vessel falling from the sky. A Cathari fighter trailing smoke and fire as it spiraled toward the frozen wasteland below. The impact came hard and fast, throwing her against the restraints with enough force to knock the breath from her lungs, and then everything went dark. When Sam opened her eyes again, she tasted blood on her lip and felt the bitter cold already seeping into the cracked pod around her. The heating system had failed on impact, and the temperature readout on her wrist display showed numbers that made her stomach drop. She kicked open the damaged hatch and crawled out into a world of white and gray, where snow stretched in every direction and the wind cut through her uniform like a knife made of ice. The Cathari fighter had crashed maybe 200 meters away, and smoke rose from its broken hull in a thin column that the wind quickly scattered across the frozen plain. Sam knew she should stay with her pod and wait for rescue. Knew that approaching an enemy crash site alone was exactly the kind of stupid decision that got soldiers killed. But her training as a combat medic screamed louder than her survival instincts. Someone might be alive in that wreckage, and she could not just sit here and let them die. She trudged through the knee-deep snow, her breath forming clouds that froze almost instantly in the brutal air. And by the time she reached the Cathari ship, her fingers had gone numb inside her gloves. The pilot had been thrown from the cockpit during the crash, and Sam found him lying face down in a drift of snow about 20 meters from the burning wreckage. He was Cathari, no doubt about that. His scaled skin was a deep green color, now pale and fading toward gray, and his powerful frame was built like a predator designed for speed and strength combined. Sam had seen Cathari before, mostly in combat footage and intelligence briefings that painted them as monsters. Cold-blooded killers who viewed humanity as nothing more than vermin to be exterminated. But the creature lying before her now was not a monster. He was a wounded being, bleeding from a gash on his head and barely breathing in the frozen air. She checked his vital signs with her medical scanner and found that his core temperature was dropping fast. Cathari were cold-blooded, which meant this frozen moon would kill him twice as fast as it would kill her. Why am I doing this? She muttered to herself as she grabbed him under the arms and began dragging him back toward the crash sites. She spotted something that made her heart leap with desperate hope. A small emergency shelter. Pod had ejected from the Cathari ship during the crash and landed intact about 50 meters away. It was Cathari technology, but shelter was shelter, and Sam changed direction immediately. The shelter pod was barely big enough for 2 people, maybe 3 meters long and 2 meters wide, with a low ceiling that forced her to crouch as she dragged the unconscious alien inside. The heating system activated automatically when she sealed the hatch, but the readout showed it was damaged and could only maintain a temperature just above freezing. Nowhere near warm enough for comfortable survival. Sam checked her own pod through the shelter's small viewport. It was too damaged to provide anything useful, and the storm clouds gathering on the horizon told her she would not have time to salvage much. Her communication device had been destroyed in the crash, and when she checked the Cathari pilot's equipment, she found his transmitter was equally useless. They were stranded on a frozen moon with no way to call for help, a damaged shelter, and limited supplies. She looked down at the unconscious alien and wondered if she had made a terrible mistake by saving him. When he woke up, he might simply kill her and take the shelter for himself. But Sam had not become a medic to let people die, not even enemies, not even when saving them might cost her own life. She treated the wound on his head with supplies from her emergency kit, cleaned the blood from his scales, and wrapped him in the single thermal blanket she found in the shelter's storage compartment. The storm hit 2 hours later, and the shelter shook with the force of winds that howled like hungry beasts outside. The temperature inside dropped even further, and Sam found herself shivering uncontrollably despite wearing every piece of clothing she had. The Cathari pilot remained unconscious, his breathing shallow and his skin growing paler by the hour. Sam knew the signs of hypothermic shock, had seen it kill humans and aliens alike during her years as a combat medic, and she knew this pilot would be dead before morning if something did not change. She made a decision that would have seemed insane just a day ago. The thermal blanket was not enough. The damaged heater was not enough. But Sam had something the cold-blooded alien desperately needed: her own body heat. She removed her frozen outer jacket, which was doing more harm than good with the ice crystals embedded in its fabric, and crawled under the thermal blanket beside him. The Cathari's skin was cold as death against her own, and she wrapped her arms around him and pressed her warm human body against his freezing form. It was the strangest thing she had ever done, holding an enemy soldier like a lover while a storm raged outside and death waited patiently for them both. But slowly, so slowly she almost missed it. His skin began to warm and his breathing grew stronger. Sam talked to herself through the long night, telling stories about Earth to stay awake, describing the green forests and blue oceans to a creature who probably could not hear her and definitely would not care. She talked about her brother, who had died in the first year of the war, about her parents back home who worried about her every day, about the small apartment she hoped to return to someday. When dawn finally broke and the storm began to fade, Sam was exhausted but alive, and the Cathari pilot was stable. His eyes opened suddenly, golden and slitted like a serpent's, and Sam found herself staring into the face of the enemy. He moved faster than she expected, reaching for a weapon that was not there, and his hand closed around empty air. Sam scrambled backward until her back hit the shelter wall, and they stared at each other across the tiny space with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. "Easy," she said, holding up her empty hands. "I'm not going to hurt you, and you are in no condition to hurt me, so let us both just calm down and figure this out." He said something in his own language, harsh and guttural sounds that her damaged translator could barely process. The broken device on her wrist crackled and spit out a fragmented translation. "Human, why? Alive, trap." Sam almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. "No trap," she said slowly. "We crashed, both of us, and this shelter was the only thing that survived intact. I saved your life because that is what I do. And now we are stuck here together until someone finds us." The Cathari warrior stared at her with those golden eyes, and she could see the confusion and suspicion warring on his alien face. He did not trust her, probably could not even understand why she had helped him, but he was too weak to fight and too smart to try. Outside, the wind still howled, and Sam knew that their struggle for survival had only just begun. The Cathari warrior pressed himself against the far wall of the tiny shelter, his golden eyes never leaving Sam as she slowly lowered her hands. She could see him shivering, his body still struggling to regulate its temperature after the near-fatal hypothermia, and she knew he was in no condition to be a threat even if he wanted to be. "My name is Samantha," she said slowly, pointing to herself. "Sam, you can call me Sam." "What is your name?" The translator on her wrist crackled again, and she caught fragments of his response. "Velthran warrior, 3rd Fleet. Velthran," she repeated. And he seemed surprised that she could pronounce it correctly. "Okay, Velthran. Here is the situation. We are on a frozen moon called Arctis 7. Our ships are destroyed, our communication devices are broken, and there is a storm outside that will kill us both if we try to leave." He listened with that unreadable reptilian expression, and Sam wished she could tell what he was thinking. "I have medical supplies and some emergency rations," she continued, pulling out the small pack she had salvaged from her escape pod. "The food is human food, but I think some of it should be safe for your species." Velthran looked at the offered ration bar with obvious disgust and spoke again in his harsh language. The translator gave her poison trick human deception. Sam sighed and tore open the ration bar, taking a large bite right in front of him and chewing slowly before swallowing. "See?" she said. "Not poison, just bad military food that tastes like cardboard. You need to eat something or your body will not have the energy to stay warm." He still did not take the food, but she saw something shift in his eyes, a tiny crack in the wall of suspicion. She placed the ration bar on the floor between them and went back to checking the shelter systems, giving him space to make his own decision. The heating unit was definitely damaged, and Sam's attempts to repair it only confirmed that it would never work at full capacity. They would have to find another way to stay warm through the night. The temperature outside had dropped even further now that the sun was setting, and frost was already forming on the inside of the viewport. Sam wrapped her arms around herself and tried to stop shivering, but the cold was seeping into her bones despite her best efforts. She noticed that Velthran had eaten half the ration bar while she was distracted, and she pretended not to see so he could save whatever pride he had left. "The temperature is going to drop below survivable levels tonight," she said without looking at him. "Your species is cold-blooded, which means you will enter torpor and possibly die if we do not find a way to generate more heat." Velthran made a sound that might have been her laugh. The translator interpreted, "Die. Here. Frozen human irony. Nobody is dying here." Sam said firmly, "Not you and not me. I did not drag your heavy body through the snow just to watch you freeze to death." She pulled out the thermal blanket again and made a decision that she knew would be difficult for both of them. "Last night, when you were unconscious, I kept you alive by sharing my body heat," she explained, watching his face for a reaction. "Humans are warm-blooded, which means my body generates its own heat. If we stay close together under this blanket, I can keep your temperature stable through the night." The disgust on his face was immediate and obvious. His words came fast and angry. "Touch. Human dishonor warrior. Never. Pride is going to get you killed." Sam shot back. "And it will get me killed too, because I'm not about to survive the night alone in this broken shelter. So you can either swallow your disgust and let me help you, or we can both freeze to death as enemies." Velthran stared at her for a long moment, and she could see the internal battle playing out behind those golden eyes. Everything he had been taught told him that humans were inferior, that physical contact with one was degrading, that accepting help from an enemy was the ultimate shame. But he was also smart enough to know she was right. The first shiver hit him hard, his whole body shaking as the cold began to take hold again, and Sam watched him fight against the inevitable with stubborn Kethari pride. "Fine," she said, spreading the thermal blanket on the floor and lying down on one side. "I will be here when you change your mind, because you will change your mind. I would rather you do it before you are too far gone for me to save." She closed her eyes and tried to rest, listening to the howling wind outside and the sound of her own breathing in the tiny shelter. Time passed slowly, measured in shivers and the gradual deepening of the cold. Then she felt movement beside her, felt the weight of a body lowering itself onto the blanket, felt cold scales pressing against her back as Velthran finally surrendered to survival. "Thank you," she whispered, and she heard him make a sound that was somewhere between anger and shame. She turned slowly, carefully, and wrapped her arms around him the way she had done the night before, pressing her warmth against his cold form. He was stiff as a statue at first, every muscle in his body locked against the unwanted contact. But gradually the warmth began to seep into him and his body relaxed. "Tell me about your world," Sam said quietly, trying to distract them both from the strangeness of the situation. "I have only seen images of Cathari Prime in military briefings." He was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. Then the translator crackled. "Hot, always suns too. Deserts, red, sand, cities, stone, 2 suns." Sam repeated. "That sounds beautiful. Earth only has 1 sun, but we have oceans that cover most of the planet. Water so deep you cannot see the bottom." She felt him shift slightly, and his next words came with what might have been curiosity. "Water, falling, sky. You spoke before." He had heard her talking during the night. She realized, even though he had seemed unconscious. "Rain," she said with a small smile. "We call it rain when the water falls from the sky. Sometimes it falls frozen, and we call it snow, like the white powder outside." "Strange world," the translator offered. "Humans, strange species," Sam laughed softly, and the sound seemed to surprise him. "We think the same thing about you," she admitted. "The Cathari are so different from us, but maybe that is not a bad thing. Maybe different does not have to mean enemy." The silence that followed was heavy with things unsaid. Years of war and death and hatred standing between them like a wall. But here in this tiny shelter, with their bodies pressed together for warmth and survival, that wall seemed a little less solid than before. "Why, save me?" Velthrin asked again, and this time the question carried real confusion rather than suspicion. Sam thought about it carefully before answering. "Because I am a healer," she said finally. "I became a medic because I believe every life has value, even the lives of people who might be my enemies. My brother died in the first battle of this war, and I decided then that I would save as many lives as I could, no matter whose lives they were." Velthrin was quiet for a long time, and Sam could feel something shifting in the way he held himself against her. "Humans strange," he said again, but this time the translator caught something different in his tone, something almost like respect. The night passed slowly, but it passed, and when the weak light of morning finally crept through the viewport, they were both still alive. Velthrin pulled away from her as soon as he felt strong enough, and Sam let him go without comment. But when she met his eyes across the shelter, she saw something there that had not been present the day before. It was not trust, not yet, not friendship or alliance or anything so simple. But it was a beginning. "The storm is weakening," Sam said, checking the external sensors. "I need to go out and salvage supplies from both crash sites. We need food, fuel cells, and if we are lucky, something we can use to call for rescue." Velthrin spoke quickly. "Ice, stalkers, hunt storm, breaks, dangerous." Sam had read about ice stalkers in her briefing on Arctis 7. They were predators native to this moon, fast and deadly and very hungry after being confined by the storm. "I have to try," she said simply. "Staying here without supplies is just a slower way to die." She grabbed a piece of metal debris and fashioned it into a crude blade, tested its weight and balance, then headed for the hatch. "Human," Velthrin called after her, and she paused at the door. "Sam," he corrected himself, struggling with the unfamiliar sound. "But careful," she smiled at him, surprised and touched by the warning. "I will try," she promised, and then she stepped out into the frozen world outside. The cold hit Sam like a physical blow the moment she stepped outside the shelter, and she had to force herself to keep moving instead of retreating back into the relative warmth behind her. The storm had weakened considerably overnight, but the wind still carried enough bite to make every exposed inch of skin ache with cold. She headed for her crashed escape pod first, wading through snow that reached past her knees in some places. The pod was even more damaged than she remembered, half buried in a drift of snow and ice. But she managed to salvage 2 more ration bars, a spare power cell, and a small water purifier that still seemed to work. The Kithari fighter was her next target, and she approached it carefully, watching for any signs of the ice stalkers Velthran had warned her about. The wreckage was scattered across a wide area, and Sam spent nearly an hour picking through the debris and collecting anything that might be useful. She found more emergency rations designed for a Kithari physiology, several fuel cells that were compatible with the shelter's heating system, and most importantly, a damaged transmitter that looked like it might be repairable. Her arms were full of salvage when she heard the first sound that did not belong to the wind. It was a low clicking noise, almost like bones being rattled together, and it came from somewhere behind the largest piece of wreckage. Sam set down her salvage supplies slowly and gripped her makeshift blade, her heart pounding against her ribs. The ice stalker emerged from behind the debris like a nightmare-given form, all white fur and translucent skin stretched over a body that was wrong in ways her brain struggled to process. It was the size of a large dog, but built more like a spider, with too many legs and a mouth that seemed to take up half its face. Those jaws opened wide as it spotted her, revealing rows of teeth designed for tearing through frozen meat. Sam did not run. Running from a predator was almost always the wrong choice, and besides, there was nowhere to run to. The shelter was too far away, and she would never make it through the deep snow before this thing caught her. Instead, she moved sideways slowly, keeping her blade between herself and the creature while trying to circle around toward the shelter. The ice stalker tracked her movement with eyes that glittered like chips of blue ice, clicking its jaws in what might have been anticipation or communication. When it lunged, Sam was ready. She threw herself to the side, feeling the rush of air as those jaws snapped shut in the space where her throat had been, and brought her blade down hard across the creature's flank. The metal bit deep into white fur and pale flesh, and the ice stalker screamed in a voice that sounded almost human. But it was not finished. The creature whirled and came at her again, and this time Sam was not fast enough to dodge completely. One of its legs caught her across the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her tumbling into the snow. She rolled desperately, feeling the cold bite into her back, and came up just in time to see the ice stalker leaping for her throat. Sam thrust her blade upward with both hands, bracing it against the snow behind her, and the creature impaled itself on the metal with its own momentum. The weight of it drove the air from her lungs and pinned her to the frozen ground, and for a terrible moment she thought it might still be alive enough to kill her. But the ice stalker shuddered once, twice, and then went still. Sam lay there in the snow for what felt like hours, gasping for breath with the weight of the dead predator on top of her, before she finally found the strength to push it aside and climb to her feet. She was wounded, bleeding from several cuts where the creature's claws had caught her, but she was alive. Movement at the edge of her vision made her spin around, blade raised and ready for another attack. But it was Velthran, standing at the entrance of the shelter with an expression on his face that she could not read. He had watched the whole fight, she realized, and seeing her face down a predator that his own people considered deadly and come out victorious. Sam gathered her salvage supplies with shaking hands and made her way back to the shelter, where Velthran stepped aside to let her enter without a word. She collapsed onto the floor of the shelter and let the relative warmth wash over her, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain from her system. Velthran knelt beside her and began examining her wounds with surprising gentleness. "Death Worlder," the translator offered, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like wonder. "What does that mean?" Sam asked, too tired to care about proper questions. "Your world," Velthran explained slowly, his clawed hands carefully cleaning the blood from her cuts. "High gravity, diverse predators, extreme weather. Your species survives everything we call Death World planets, like yours." Sam laughed weakly at the idea. "Earth does not feel like a death world when you live there," she said. "But I suppose everything is relative." To you, I must seem like some kind of monster that refuses to die. Velthrin made a sound that might have been agreement. Cathari taught humans weak, he admitted. Fragile, short, lived inferior. I believed this until today. He finished treating her wounds and sat back on his heels, looking at her with new eyes. You killed Ice Stalker alone with piece of metal, he said. Cathari warriors hunt them in groups with energy weapons and still sometimes die. Sam shrugged, wincing as the movement pulled at her injured shoulder. I did not have much choice, she said simply. It was me or the stalker, and I was not ready to die. Velthorn shook his head slowly, and Sam thought she saw something like respect in those golden eyes. Not choice, he said. Will human will you refuse to lose that is different? They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Sam realized that something had changed between them in the last few hours. The wall of suspicion and hatred was still there, but now there were cracks in it, openings through which something new was starting to grow. The transmitter, Sam said finally, pointing to the device she had salvaged. I think I can repair it if you help me. Your technology is different from ours, but the basic principles should be similar. Velthorn examined the damaged transmitter with expert eyes and nodded slowly. Possible, the translator confirmed. Will take time. Power source weak. Then we should get started, Sam said, pushing herself up to a sitting position despite the protests from her wounds. Every hour we waste is another hour we might not survive. They worked together through the rest of the day, human fingers and Cathari claws performing a delicate dance of repair and reconstruction. Sam found that Velthran was actually quite good at explaining his technology, and his patience with her questions surprised her. As the weak light of the sun began to fade again, Sam sat back and studied the mostly repaired transmitter. Tell me about Cathari Prime, she said. Not the military briefing version, the real version. What is it like growing up there? Velthorn was quiet for a moment, as if deciding whether to answer. Harsh, he said finally. Beautiful, but harsh. I grew up in the southern deserts, learned to fight before I learned to read. Do you have family there? Sam asked softly. The question seemed to hit him harder than she expected. Sister, he said, and she heard something painful in the word. Younger I fight, so she does not have to. Sam nodded slowly, understanding more than he had said. My brother's name was Daniel, she offered in return. He was 2 years older than me and thought he was invincible. He died in the first month of the war, and I have been trying to save enough lives to make up for his ever since. Velthran looked at her with something that might have been empathy. War takes, he said simply, and it was the most honest thing either of them had said. Tell me about Earth, he said suddenly, changing the subject. Tell me about this death world that makes warriors out of healers. Sam smiled and began to talk, describing the oceans and mountains, the forests and cities, the billions of humans living their small lives under a single yellow sun. She told him about rain and snow, about thunderstorms and hurricanes, about the predators that humans had either conquered or learned to live beside. And Velthorn listened with those golden eyes fixed on her face, seeing not an enemy but a survivor, a fighter, a daughter of a world as harsh and beautiful as his own. 2 days passed in the tiny shelter on Arctis 7, and with each passing hour, the wall between Sam and Velthran grew thinner. They worked on the transmitter during the daylight hours, their hands moving together in a rhythm that had become almost natural. At night, they still shared body heat under the thermal blanket, but the stiffness and shame had faded from Velthran's posture. Now he simply accepted it as necessary, and sometimes Sam thought he might even find comfort in it. How did this war start? Sam asked on the second morning, as they sat together eating their dwindling rations. Velthorn was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with whether to answer. First, contact, he finally said through the translator. Your ship entered our space. We sent greeting party. Your captain made gesture. He raised his hand and extended it toward her, palm open, fingers spread. Sam felt her stomach drop as she recognized what he was describing. A handshake, she whispered. He tried to shake hands? Belthran nodded grimly. In Keth-Ari culture, he explained. Open hand, extended, is challenge, threat, promise. Of violence, your captain insulted our ambassador in front of his warriors. Sam closed her eyes and felt a wave of sick horror wash over her. And your people responded to the perceived threat, she said. And then we responded to your response. And before anyone could understand what had happened, we were at war. Thousands dead, Velfran confirmed. Because of gesture meaning different things, Sam did not know whether to laugh or cry. Her brother had died because of a handshake, because two species had met across the stars and failed to understand each other before the weapons started firing. That is the saddest thing I've ever heard, she said finally. Velfran made a sound of agreement. I learned truth only after years of fighting, he admitted. Most Cathari still believe humans attacked first. Most humans probably believe. Same about us. They sat in heavy silence, the weight of wasted lives pressing down on them both. My sister, Velfran said suddenly, breaking the quiet. Tarlis, she believes war is glorious, wants to become warrior. Like me, I pray she never sees what I have seen. Sam thought of her own younger cousins back on Earth. Children who played war games and pretended to fight aliens, never understanding the real cost. Daniel always said war was simple, she offered. Good guys and bad guys, us and them. It took me years after his death to realize that maybe it was never that simple. Velfran looked at her with those golden eyes that had become familiar over the past days. You saved me, he said. Enemy, stranger, you saved my life. There is debt. Now life, debt, even war cannot erase. Sam smiled sadly. I do not want your debt, she said. I just want this to mean something. If we both survive this, if we both make it home, maybe we can tell people the truth about how the war started. They will not believe, Velfran warned. Maybe not, Sam agreed, but we have to try. Too many people have died for a mistake that could have been avoided with just a little understanding. The transmitter hummed to life under their hands, and both of them stared at it with a mixture of hope and fear. It works, Sam breathed. 1. Signal, Velfran said, examining the power readings. Maybe 2, then power, dies, must, choose. Carefully. Sam's mind raced through the options. They could signal the human fleet and hope for rescue, but if the Kethari arrived first, Velthran would be captured or killed. They could signal the Kethari fleet and hope for rescue, but then Sam would face the same fate. Or they could try something that had never been done before. What if we signal both? She asked. Velthran's eyes widened. Neutral frequency, he said slowly. Both fleets would hear, both would come, and neither could attack without starting a battle right here. Sam continued. They would have to negotiate, even if it was just to figure out who gets us. It was insane, she knew that. There was every chance that both fleets would arrive and immediately start shooting at each other, turning this frozen moon into a battlefield. But there was also a chance, however small, that two enemies forced to face each other without the comfortable distance of space combat might actually talk. Velthran was silent for a long time. You trust me, he said finally, and it was not a question. I trust that you do not want your sister to grow up in a galaxy at war, Sam replied. I trust that you have seen enough death to know it solves nothing. I trust that you are as tired of fighting as I am. He reached for the transmitter controls, and for a moment she thought he might signal only his own fleet. But instead, He entered a frequency she did not recognize, one that must have been known to both species as neutral ground. "Together," he said, looking at her with something that might have been the beginning of friendship. "Together," she agreed. He transmitted the distress signal, and the power cell began to drain immediately. Now there was nothing to do but wait. They sat side by side in the shelter, watching the stars through the small viewport, wondering who would arrive first. "If your people come," Velthrin said quietly, "tell them I surrendered. Peacefully tell them I helped you survive." Sam shook her head firmly. "I will tell them the truth," she said. "I will tell them that a HFY warrior saved my life as surely as I saved his, and that we survived together because we chose to see each other as people instead of enemies." Velthrin made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Strange human," he said, and this time it sounded almost like affection. "Strange HFY," she replied with a smile. The hours passed slowly as they waited for rescue or death or something in between. They talked about their homes, their families, the dreams they had held before war, made those dreams seem small and distant. Sam learned that Velthrin played a HFY instrument similar to a human flute, that he loved the music of his people and missed it terribly during long deployments. Velthrin learned that Sam had wanted to be a veterinarian before the war, that she had a talent for healing animals as well as people, and hoped to use that talent someday in a galaxy at peace. They discovered that despite all the differences between their species, the things that mattered most were remarkably the same. Love for family, hope for the future, a desire to protect and nurture rather than destroy. As the third night fell on Arctis 7, they lay together under the thermal blanket one more time, but now it felt less like survival and more like solidarity. "Tomorrow," Velthrin said into the darkness. "Tomorrow," Sam agreed. They did not need to say more. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The dawn came cold and clear, and with it came the distant thunder of ships breaking through the atmosphere. Sam scrambled to the viewport and looked up at a sky filled with vessels, both human and HFY, arriving at almost exactly the same moment. "They both came," she whispered. Velthrin stood beside her, his shoulder touching hers, and together they watched as the two fleets that had been killing each other for years faced off across a frozen valley. "Ready?" she asked. He extended his hand toward her, palm open, in the gesture that had started a war. She took his hand and held it firmly. "Ready," he said. The ships landed on opposite sides of the frozen valley, and within minutes the ice was crawling with soldiers from both species. Human Marines in heavy combat armor formed ranks on one side, their weapons trained on the HFY warriors who mirrored their formation on the other. Sam could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife, and she knew that one wrong move could turn this standoff into a massacre. "We need to go out there," she said to Velthrin. "We need to show them." He nodded once, his face set in grim determination, and together they unsealed the shelter hatch and stepped out into the cold morning light. Every weapon on both sides immediately swung toward them, and Sam felt her heart stop for a terrifying moment. But no one fired. She raised her hand slowly, showing she was unarmed, and Velthrin did the same beside her. A human officer broke from the ranks and approached them with his weapon raised, his face hidden behind his helmet visor. "Corporal Perry?" he demanded. "Step away from the hostile and get behind our lines." Sam shook her head. "He is not a hostile," she said, loud enough for both sides to hear. "His name is Velthrin, and he saved my life as surely as I saved his. We crashed here 3 days ago, and we survived together, and I am not going to abandon him now." The officer seemed confused by her response, but before he could say anything else, a HFY commander was approaching from the other side. This one was larger than Velthrin, covered in scars that spoke of many battles, and his eyes were cold as he looked at the human standing beside his warrior. "Valthrin," the commander growled. And the translator on Sam's wrist picked up fragments. "Explain, human, shame, dishonor." Valthrin stepped forward and spoke in his own language. Too fast for the damaged translator to keep up. But Sam saw the expressions changing on the faces of the Kethari soldiers as he spoke. She caught fragments. Life, debt, truth, war, beginning, gesture, misunderstanding. Thousands dead, for nothing. The Kethari commander's eyes widened. And then his face twisted with anger. "Lies," the translator offered. "Human propaganda weakness. It is not a lie." Sam shouted, stepping forward despite the weapons pointed at her. "We've been killing each other for years because of a handshake. A greeting that means friendship on my world and threat on yours." She turned to face the human soldiers, seeing their confusion and doubt. "The first human captain extended his hand in peace," she continued, "and the Kethari saw it as a challenge. They responded to what they thought was aggression, and we responded to what we thought was unprovoked attack. And before anyone could explain the mistake, it was too late." Murmurs rippled through both lines, and Sam could see soldiers on both sides looking at each other with new uncertainty. "How do we know this is true?" the human officer demanded. Sam turned to Valthrin, and he nodded slightly before speaking in careful, halting English that must have been painful for him to produce. "I know truth," he said. "I read records hidden by commanders who did not want to admit mistake. This war built on lie." The Kethari commander roared something angry and took a step toward Valthrin with his claws raised. But Sam moved faster, putting herself between them with her arms spread wide. "You will have to go through me," she said, her voice steady despite the terror in her heart. "And if you do that, if you kill an unarmed human who's trying to bring peace, every soldier here will see what Kethari honor really means." The commander stopped, his claws inches from her face, and for a long moment no one breathed. Then a new voice cut through the tension, strong and authoritative. "Stand down, Commander Varnock." An older Kethari was approaching from the landing zone, wearing robes instead of armor, and the soldiers parted before him like water around a stone. Sam saw the commander bow his head reluctantly, and she realized this newcomer must be someone very important indeed. "I am High Arbiter Thalric," the elder Kethari announced, his translator rendering his words in clear English. "I came when I heard the neutral frequency signal, because in 20 years of war, no one has ever used it. I wanted to see what could possibly bring both fleets to the same frozen moon." He looked at Sam and Valthrin standing together, and something shifted in his ancient eyes. "And now I see," he continued, "a human and a Kethari standing shoulder to shoulder, defending each other against their own people. This is something I never expected to witness." "With respect, sir," Sam said, "we are not doing anything remarkable. We are just two people who had no choice but to trust each other, and who discovered that trust was not misplaced." The High Arbiter was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "You speak of the war's beginning," he said finally, "of a misunderstanding that cost countless lives. I have heard these rumors before, but they have always been suppressed by those who profit from continued conflict." "Then let us unsuppress them," Sam replied. "Let us tell the truth and see what happens. Maybe nothing will change. Maybe people will refuse to believe us. But at least we will have tried." She took a deep breath and did something that took all her courage. She extended her hand toward the High Arbiter, palm open, fingers relaxed. "On Earth, this is how we greet friends," she said clearly. "We show our empty hand to prove we carry no weapon. We offer touch to prove we mean no harm. We say, with this gesture, that we trust you enough to make ourselves vulnerable." The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye was on Sam's extended hand, human and Kethari alike. The High Arbiter looked at her hand for a long moment, and then, slowly, he extended his own clawed hand and wrapped it around hers. "Then let this be a new beginning," he said. The sound that went through both armies was like a wave, gasps and whispers, and the slow lowering of weapons. It was not peace, Sam knew that. Decades of war could not be erased by one gesture on a frozen moon. But it was a start. The negotiations took months, but they happened. Sam and Velthrin testified before councils on both sides, telling their story again and again until people finally began to listen. There were those who refused to believe, who called them traitors and liars, but there were others who had grown tired of war and desperately wanted to believe peace was possible. 1 year after the crash on Arctis 7, the first real ceasefire was signed. Not a pause in hostilities, but an actual agreement to stop fighting. Sam was assigned to a new joint medical exchange program, where human and Kethari healers would learn from each other and work together to save lives instead of taking them. The station where the program was headquartered orbited Arctis 7, chosen specifically because of what had happened on that frozen moon. Sam stood at the observation window, looking down at the white surface below, remembering the cold and the fear and the unexpected warmth that had grown between two enemies. The door behind her opened, and she turned to see Velthrin entering in the robes of a diplomatic liaison. He had been appointed to serve as the Kethar representative to the exchange program, which meant they would be working together again. "You look well," Sam said with a smile. "As do you," he replied, and his English had improved dramatically in the past year. "I hear you have been teaching our young healers about human medicine. They say you are very patient with their questions." Sam laughed. After surviving 3 days in a broken shelter with a grumpy Kethari warrior, nothing feels difficult anymore. Velthrin made the rumbling sound that she now knew was his species' version of laughter. They stood together at the window, looking down at the moon that had brought them together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had not crashed?" Sam asked quietly. Velthrin considered the question seriously. "We would still be enemies," he said finally, "fighting a war that no one truly understood. I would probably be dead by now, and you would probably be grieving for more lost patients." He turned to face her. "Instead, we are here, building something new. I think the universe has a strange sense of humor." "I think the universe has a strange sense of humor." Sam nodded slowly. "Then maybe we should thank whoever is responsible," she said, "for one small shelter, one freezing night, and one impossible chance at friendship." Velthrin extended his hand toward her, palm open, in the gesture that had once started a war. Sam took his hand and held it firmly. And in that moment, on a station orbiting a frozen moon, two former enemies proved that the galaxy had room for something besides hatred and fear. It had room for understanding. It had room for trust. It had room for warmth.